3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country...
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
It is always a dizzying feeling to stand at a turning point in history. They can be large, like the JFK assassination, the falling of the Berlin Wall, the September 11th attacks, the first days of COVID. They can be smaller, like natural disasters, presidential elections, and surprising developments in the lives of celebrities. These shared moments shape culture. This past Monday, we found ourselves again at a turning point. But this one was rather unexpected and also happy. You're listening to the sounds of Israelis in Tel Aviv, recorded by CNBC on Monday. They are welcoming a series of large black vans returning to Israel from Gaza. And in those vans, the 20 remaining living Israeli hostages that have been held by Hamas in Gaza. For the first time in over 2 years, these people will see their families, loved ones, and homeland again. What brought this deal about, and what might we expect to see happen in the future? To answer some of those questions, I sat down with Daniel Flesch, Senior Policy Analyst for the Middle East and North Africa, here at the Heritage Foundation. Daniel Flesch, welcome to Heritage Explains.
Great to be here.
You are new to our show, although some folks who have been following Heritage may know you from your frequent news appearances and writings and other things. For those of you who don't, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do here at Heritage, and how did you come to study what you study?
Certainly. I'm a senior policy analyst focusing on the Middle East and North Africa. As an aside, I also lead Heritage's efforts in combating anti-Semitism through the National Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, specifically Project Esther. But as it relates to our conversation today, I believe, my focus in the Middle East goes back through a little bit of my resume here. I'm American, but I was fortunate enough to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces for a few years after college as a paratrooper. It's not uncommon for non-Israeli Jews to be able to serve in the Israeli army. And following that, later in my career, I served as senior policy advisor to Israel's mission to the United Nations, effective spokesperson for the ambassador, for multiple ambassadors there. And then actually after October 7th, I was doing some different work, but like many people who've been involved in Israel for their career, I wanted to pivot and get back into the policy space because now is the moment to do what we can to support our ally Israel here in the United States and to combat anti-Semitism. So I got involved with Heritage first through the anti-Semitism work and then joined here just over a year ago as a visiting fellow, focused more broadly on Israel.
That is germane to what we want to talk about today, because over this past Columbus Day weekend, we saw some pretty exciting developments in Israel. Can you talk about what happened?
Certainly. The state of Israel breathed a sigh of relief. That's what happened. The remaining 20 living hostages that Hamas had held in its terror dungeons in the Gaza Strip were repatriated back home, thanks to the tireless work of President Trump and his administration, particularly Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and others. In exchange for that release of 20 hostages, and it's supposed to be released of the 28 remaining deceased hostages, of which, as we record this, only about 4 have been returned. There's another 4 or 6 who are expected to be returned momentarily. But in exchange for that, Israel has effectively stopped the war against Hamas. There's already been an Israeli victory in many regards, but the IDF is pulling back to a previously determined demarcation line in Gaza, still maintaining possession of about 50% of the strip. And the cost of this, or the price of this rather, for Israel was to release about 1,950 Palestinian terrorists. 250 of those were serving about multiple life sentences for things such as blowing up buses, conducting terrible terror attacks against Israeli civilians going back even to the 1990s, another 1,700 who have been arrested since October 7th war began when Hamas invaded Israel in 2023. And over the weekend, the president flew to Israel, had a momentous moment at the Knesset, Israel's parliament, in which the prime minister welcomed him. The opposition leader welcomed him as well. And the president, for only the fifth time in American history, the fourth or fifth time in American history, spoke before the Knesset and talked about the bonds that we have as Americans and Israelis, between America and Israel, the moment we're at right now. And then after that, he went to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, with other Arab and European leaders to sign an agreement between a lot of these parties, committing themselves to looking towards a better future for Gaza in the Middle East.
Were you surprised by this? That this deal kind of came to be?
Yes and no. I'd say yes, because one thing that Hamas is good about is stringing people along, in that every previous negotiation and ceasefire agreement has seen Hamas retain some hostages in reserve, if you will, because that's the main leverage they have against Israel to stop the war. And so Hamas agreed when President Trump revealed his 20-point plan about a week or two ago, saying, okay, actually, we'll release the 48 hostages, alive and dead, who are still in our possession. So that was very surprising. And for President Trump to get that over the finish line is commendable, to say the least. But yet again, you could see directionally where things have been heading the last number of months, because it wasn't just the president himself and his personality and his interest of bringing this war to a close that brought it across the finish line. It was also the closeness in the U.S.-Israel relationship and the allyship there. Most notably, we saw it during the 12-day war against Iran, where Israel's Operation Rising Lion initiated that war. It was really a response to Iran for the war it had initiated against Israel on October 7th, and even before that. And then obviously the president coming with Operation Midnight Hammer to attack Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile sites. So directionally, Israel and the U.S. were going together, but it was the president's decision to bring in pressure onto Qatar, onto Turkey, and to other Arab countries, who in turn pressured Hamas. That was a new thing, a new development, and that was surprising. But it was a very welcome achievement this weekend. It was 2 years and a week after October 7th, 2023. It was actually during another Jewish holiday right now. And to have this moment now, I mentioned at the beginning, of Israel breathing a sigh of relief and actually being able to exhale. It's an open wound, the hostages being there. Israel's now able to heal into a bit of a cathartic moment. And now the hope is to build upon this for a better future in the Middle East. Now that sounds overly wrought. In some ways it kind of is, but the reality is a lot of these countries in the region realize they know that Hamas is an impediment to the future. And the future is the Abraham Accords, future is strong relations with the United States. Hamas is an impediment to both of those. And so they've said essentially for the president now to be invested in this, Hamas enough, put down your arms, although Hamas is refusing to do so, but at least release the hostages.
At this point, we're looking to the future, and there are more questions than answers about what could happen. Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest questions that are in front of us right now?
The first one is, will Hamas disarm? Part of the president's 20-point plans was that Hamas would, A, disarm, and B, no longer be part of the governing structure of Gaza going forward, whatever that ultimately looks like. Immediately in its response, Hamas said two notable things. One is, we will release the hostages, but we're not going to disarm. It will be part of a future governing structure. And they've called it different things. So right now, it's unclear how who's going to make Hamas disarm. The president just moments ago, as we record this, said in a press conference that Hamas will disarm, we'll make sure it happens. And I trust him on this. But Hamas, it's in their interest not to disarm, to maintain some sort of presence in Gaza. And right now we're seeing, over the weekend, even to this moment, there have been reports of up to 30 Palestinians who have been killed by Hamas for the supposed crime of collaborating with Israel. It's really an opportunity for Hamas to exact retribution against the other terrorist organizations, the other clans in Gaza for, again, to impose their control and power on the people there. So the biggest question is, will Hamas disarm? If Hamas does not disarm, if they're still a part of the governing structure of Gaza going forward, then Gaza and the Palestinian people there have no future. So that's probably the biggest question. And then secondly, following that is, what sort of stabilization force that's been called for will actually materialize? Who actually is going to be in control and responsible for security in Gaza? Israel won't be. They will to an extent to make sure Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel itself, but you're not going to have IDF soldiers patrolling Gazan streets anymore. That's not what Israel wants, and that's not going to be something that's happening in Gaza. So who is going to be that force? Is it going to be some of the Arab countries providing troops? Indonesia has already said they'll provide 200 to 300 people, some sort of European force. Israel's going to be very wary about the UN or perhaps Europeans coming in. An Arab force, that might be something else that they're willing to accommodate. But at the end of the day, who's going to enforce the 20-point plan? Who's going to enforce the security situation that allows reconstruction and rebuilding to proceed?
Are there any likely scenarios on that front? What do you think is most likely to happen?
I think you'll have, to begin with, you'll still have Israel conducting perhaps some low-level operations in the broader Gaza, within Gaza, beyond its line of control right now, because like it's doing in Lebanon, it is conducting operations to make sure that certain areas, southern Lebanon vis-a-vis Hezbollah, or here in this case Gaza with Hamas, does not pose a threat to Israel itself. You'll have that. And in terms of a stabilization force, I think you could have Indonesia, as I said, contributing some. You could have perhaps the Emiratis. I don't think Saudi Arabia will. The Moroccans may. You have kind of a multinational force here to some extent. Although, again, this is one of the devils in the details that needs to be hammered out. So Sharm el-Sheikh was a wonderful moment. And even going back, the president at the Knesset was an incredible moment. But now we're actually looking forward. Hamas still has arms. They still intend to be part of Gaza's future. How do you make sure that does not happen? And it is in everybody's interest, certainly the Israelis, certainly the Americans, et cetera, to make sure Hamas is not part of that future.
So obviously, as an American with deep ties to Israel, you have a lot of investment in what's been happening there. I think a question that a lot of Americans are asking, especially as they're looking at conflicts around the world, is why is this something we should care about? Why is this something that should be on our radar at all? What would you say to them?
I'd say a number of things. For one thing, October 7th, the attack in 2023 revealed that the forces of barbarism are rising again. And we saw this obviously in the day of when Hamas attacked Jews in Israel, but we see the reverberations back here in the United States. We've had these ostensibly pro-Palestinian, which are effectively pro-Hamas, which means they're anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests the last 2 years. Those who called to globalize the Intifada, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very real threat, not just to Israel. Israel, we see, has conducted stunning military victories. They'll be fine. The question here is back home. Where are we in the United States? Where are we against pushing back against these rising forces? There's a harbinger. We look to Europe. Europe right now is under siege by Islamist forces. This is one of the reasons why you had Macron in France and Starmer in the UK, and even Carney in Canada recognize a Palestinian state because they have to placate some of these bases from their left. In America, we're not at that point, thank God. But we have rising forces here that are looking to not affect U.S. policy towards Israel, but to affect the United States itself. Calling to globalize Intifada is calling for an indiscriminate campaign of violence against civilians in America to affect the structures of our country. And Israel is a leader in that fight against this Islamist threat. That's in some ways why I served in the IDF, a longer story there. But in short, I realize that Israel's enemies, the United States' enemies, are the same. So we share the same threats. We also share the same objectives and same goals. So the U.S.-Israel relationship is an integral part of the U.S. national security ecosystem. And as we try to pivot out of the Middle East, as we are perennially trying to do for good reason, the reality is we still have key strategic interests in the region, predominantly the free flow of oil, the free transit of commerce, making sure it's not a haven for terrorism to conduct 9/11 type attacks, and certainly nuclear non-proliferation with the case with Iran. Israel is a force multiplier for us on all those four fronts. And moreover, the benefit we get from the U.S.'s relationship is manifold more for the United States in terms of technology transfers, investments, et cetera, et cetera. So as Americans, we should very much support our ally Israel and realize that what Israelis are fighting there, we might be fighting here tomorrow.
Daniel Flesch, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you to Daniel Flesch for his contribution to this episode. You can follow him on X at Daniel_Flesch. And if you want to learn more about Daniel's work and those of his colleagues here at Heritage, you can go to heritage.org/Middle East. That's heritage.org/Middle-East. And thank you to you for listening to Heritage Explains. As always, you can reach out to us with any thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.